Hello, dear friends. Before we begin this inspiring story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means a lot to us and helps us create more stories for you. Thank you.
Laia had always imagined her life in chapters like the novels she loved to assign to her students. At 27 years old, she stood firmly in what she thought was the bright middle of a promising volume. Her mornings were disciplined but warm. She woke at 6, brewed coffee without milk, pulled her hair into a loose bun, and rode the bus through the humming city streets toward the high school where she worked as a literature teacher. She loved her classroom. The smell of chalk, the soft scuff of sneakers on linoleum, the restless energy of students waiting for the bell. Laia believed in the power of words. She told her students that stories were maps of the human soul, guides through grief, courage, and joy. She wasn't the kind of teacher who demanded silence and obedience. She was the kind who asked questions that lingered long after the lesson. When a shy student slipped a secret poem into her hand, she read it carefully and praised the bravery behind the fragile lines. When another failed an essay, she circled the mistakes with kindness, reminding them that every error was proof of effort. Teaching wasn't just her job, it was her identity. Her life felt solid. A small apartment lined with plants and books, Friday nights with friends at quiet cafes, Sunday calls from her parents. There was comfort in the routine, a quiet sense of belonging to her own story. But one winter morning, she noticed something: fatigue. Teachers always lived tired, but this exhaustion was different. It wasn't just a heavy day or a restless night. It crawled into her bones, sat behind her eyes, and turned stairs into mountains. She found bruises on her arms and legs with no memory of bumps or falls. She shrugged it off, told herself it was stress, or maybe iron deficiency. She drank more coffee, ate more spinach. Nothing helped. Nothing grew louder. The day she fainted in front of her class was the day denial ended. One moment she was quoting Oedipus Finch, the next she was on the floor, her students' panicked voices rising like a wave. When she woke, she was in the nurse's office, a cold compress on her forehead, fear in every gaze. At the hospital, fluorescent lights hummed overhead while nurses drew blood. Laia sat with a blanket over her knees, scrolling through messages from colleagues. "Are you okay? Do you need me to cover your class?" She smiled weakly at their concern, trying to believe it was all nothing. But dread pressed in, heavy as stone. The doctor entered with papers in his hand, his expression careful in a way that frightened her. He sat across from her, folded his hands, and said words that would echo in her head for months. "Laia, your tests show abnormalities. We need further scans, but I want to prepare you. It looks like leukemia." "Leukemia?" The syllables hung in the sterile air. She stared at him, waiting for the reassurance that belonged in movies. "Don't worry, we'll fix this." But no such line came. Her first thought wasn't about herself. It was about her students. Who will finish the play with them? Who will grade their essays? Only then did the wave crash. Her parents, her future, the dreams collapsing with one diagnosis. Telling her family was worse than hearing it. She sat at her parents' kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. Her mother began crying before Laia finished the sentence. Her father stared at the floor, jaw tight, silence heavy. "Finally," he said, "we'll get through this," but his voice cracked. The next weeks dissolved into corridors, IV poles, white coats, and the metallic taste of chemotherapy. Her long hair clumped in the shard drain. Her skin turned pale, her body foreign. Nausea followed her everywhere. Some mornings she couldn't lift a spoon. Other days she forced herself to shuffle the hallway, counting steps like prayers. Her students sent letters and drawings taped with hope. She read them under hospital blankets, tears dropping onto paper hearts and stick figures labeled Miss Laia. She taped them to the wall above her bed, a fragile fortress against despair. The mirror became her enemy. Once she had been lively, cheeks flushed with vitality. Now hollow eyes stared back, lips cracked, skin gray. She stopped looking. One night, unable to sleep, she whispered into the dark, "Am I dying?" The silence gave no answer. Yet within that silence, something stirred. She remembered her students' words, "You taught us to fight for what we believe in." And she thought, If I can teach courage, I can live it. The seed of determination was small but stubborn. She began with tiny steps. A walk around the ward, a stretch beside her bed, 5 minutes of breathing exercises. Her muscles ached, her lungs burned, but she kept going. Movement reminded her that her body was still hers, still alive, still capable of effort. Nurses watched in surprise. Patients nodded in silent encouragement. Each step became an act of defiance. Cancer would not claim her spirit. Food changed, too. Hospital meals felt lifeless. When she returned home between treatments, she studied nutrition, read articles, watched documentaries. She decided to become a vegetarian. It wasn't easy. She had grown up in a family where meat was tradition. But Leia filled her fridge with color: green spinach, red peppers, golden mangoes, purple eggplants. Each plate became a declaration: I feed my body life, not death. Her parents worried. Friends asked if she wasn't too weak to bother with diets and yoga. Even doctors raised eyebrows. But Leia smiled and said, if I stop living, cancer has already won. The months dragged on. Pain, needles, exhaustion, nights of tears. But alongside them came small victories: a day without nausea, a longer walk, laughter with a nurse, sunlight through a window that felt like grace. She learned to accept fear without surrendering to it. Fear was part of the journey, but not the driver. By autumn, she was thinner, paler, but her eyes glowed differently. Not with health yet, but with will. One evening, watching the sunset from her hospital window, she whispered, "This is not my ending. This is my turning page." And with that, her story of transformation began. When Leia returned home after her first long round of treatment, the world outside looked the same. Traffic lights blinked, children laughed in the park. Cafes served their coffee, but she was no longer the same person. She felt like a stranger wearing her own skin, someone whose reflection told only fragments of a story. Her body was fragile, her muscles slack, her hair thin. And yet, beneath all the scars of illness, something inside her had hardened into resolve. She remembered the vow she had made in the hospital. This is not my ending. This is my turning page. The first days were unbearable. Even walking from the bedroom to the kitchen felt like a marathon. But Leia forced herself to move, to stretch her arms, to breathe deeply. She researched gentle yoga routines, printed them out, and taped them to the wall. She could hold a pose for only 10 seconds before collapsing, but she counted that as victory. Her parents watched with worrying. You should rest, her mother urged. You need to save your strength. Leia smiled softly. This is how I save it. One movement at a time. Soon, she built routines. Morning stretches. 10-minute walks around the block. Light hand weights she ordered online, their pink color almost mocking her frailty. At first, her body protested, every muscle aching, every joint stiff. But each week she lasted a little longer. Her lungs grew stronger, her legs steadier. What once felt impossible became habit. Exercise was not just about the body. It was her rebellion, her declaration that she was more than her diagnosis. When sweat rolled down her temples, it felt like she was expelling fear itself. Alongside movement came food. Hospital meals had left her disillusioned: tasteless mashed potatoes, overcooked vegetables, soggy bread. She wanted to reclaim food as joy, not as duty. That was when she turned to vegetarianism. It began with a documentary she watched late one night, wrapped in a blanket, tea cooling beside her. It spoke of clean nutrition, of feeding the body with plants, of healing through simplicity. The next day she cleared her fridge. Out went the processed meats and frozen meals. In came baskets of fresh vegetables, fruits, grains, legumes, nuts, seeds. Her kitchen became a laboratory. She experimented with quinoa salads, lentil soups, smoothies packed with spinach and berries. She baked bread with whole grains, roasted chickpeas for snacks, blended hummus with garlic and lemon until it tasted like hope. It wasn't easy. The first weeks she battled cravings, the longing for food she had always known. But each time she chose color and freshness, she felt a surge of pride. She told herself, every bite is medicine. Her father shook his head but helped chop carrots anyway. Her mother sighed but learned to cook tofu. Friends teased her gently, "So you've become a rabbit now." But when they tasted her meals, they admitted they were delicious. Doctors were cautious. Some encouraged her, others warned her not to abandon conventional nutrition. Leah listened politely but followed her instinct. "I'm not rejecting medicine," she explained. "I'm adding life to it." Still, it wasn't a miracle cure. The road was steep and uneven. There were days when her body betrayed her again, when nausea returned, when fatigue pinned her to the bed. There were nights of crying, of whispering to the ceiling, "Why me?" There were mornings when she doubted everything, when she wanted to quit the routines, to give in to despair. But for every fall, she found a reason to rise. A student's letter telling her how she inspired them. A morning when the sunrise painted her window gold. A step further than yesterday, she began keeping a journal. On one page she wrote her fears. What if it comes back? What if I am never myself again? On the next, she wrote her victories, walked 20 minutes today, cooked a new soup, laughed with mom. The journal became her balance, her way of acknowledging pain without letting it rule. Months passed. Her body grew stronger, leaner. She could jog lightly in the park, her breath steady, her steps sure. She added Pilates, swimming, cycling. What had started as survival became passion. She fell in love with movement, not for appearance but for life. She joined a local gym. At first she was intimidated, surrounded by weights and machines, but trainers welcomed her with warmth. She started with light routines, gradually building strength. Each improvement felt monumental. She was no longer the frail patient tied to IV lines. She was Leah, the woman lifting dumbbells, stretching, running. Her transformation astonished those around her. Neighbors saw her jogging and whispered, "Is that really her?" Old colleagues at school marveled at her energy. Even her doctors admitted that her progress was unusual. But Leah knew it wasn't magic. It was persistence, discipline, the refusal to surrender. She also discovered community. Online forums for cancer survivors became her second family. She shared her routines, her recipes, her struggles. Others shared theirs. They celebrated each other's victories, comforted each other in setbacks. Leah realized she wasn't alone. Her story resonated. At a local support group, she stood nervously before a circle of chairs and told her journey. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I'm just a woman who didn't want to stop living. Cancer tried to take my story away, but I took it back." The room erupted in applause. Some cried, some hugged her, some simply nodded in deep recognition. That day, she understood. Her fight was not just hers anymore. She was carrying others with her. But the fear never fully left. Each follow-up appointment felt like walking into a courtroom where fate delivered verdicts. Each scan made her palms sweat, her stomach churn. She prayed for clean results, and most times she got them. But always in the back of her mind lingered the whisper, "What if it returns?" She learned to live with that whisper, not to silence it, but to walk beside it. Fear became her shadow, and shadows cannot exist without light. By the second year after diagnosis, she was a different person. Still a teacher at heart, but now also an athlete, a vegetarian, a survivor. She had rebuilt her life with bricks of discipline, mortar of hope. One evening, after running 5 kilometers without stopping, something unimaginable months earlier, she sat on a bench, sweat cooling on her skin, and looked at the stars. She whispered, "I am alive. I'm stronger than I thought." And she believed it. The day of her final scans felt like Judgment Day. Leah sat in the hospital waiting room, her hands trembling around a paper cup of water that tasted of nothing. Around her, other patients waited too, some old, some young, all carrying invisible battles. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, and the clock ticked too loudly. She closed her eyes, whispering the mantra she had repeated for months, "I am alive, I am strong, I am ready." When the doctor finally called her name, she rose on shaky legs. The office was sterile, the computer screen glowing with images she didn't understand. The doctor cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and smiled. A real smile, not the careful one she had learned to fear. "Leah," he said, "your scans are clear. There is no sign of cancer." The words echoed through her body like a bell. Clear? No sign. She stared at him, unable to breathe, waiting for the catch. But there was none. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing with relief. Her parents hugged her until she couldn't feel the ground. Friends called, students sent messages filled with exclamation marks and hearts. The battle was over. She had won. Yet, in the quiet of her own room that night, Laia realized something. Survival was only part of the story. Now she had to live. The months that followed were filled with cautious joy. She celebrated small things, the taste of fresh strawberries, the ability to climb stairs without gasping, the sound of birds at dawn. Every sunrise felt like a gift, every laugh like a miracle. But she also carried fear. What if it came back? Survivorship was not a clean slate, but a balancing act between joy and vigilance. Each ache, each cough sent a ripple of anxiety. She learned to breathe through it, reminding herself, I am here. Today is mine. Her identity began to shift. Teaching was still in her blood, but she felt called to something larger. She wanted to share her journey, to turn her pain into purpose. So she left her classroom with tears and gratitude, hugging her students one by one. Remember, she told them, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's walking with it. Laia entered the world of fitness not as a hobby, but as a mission. She trained for hours, pushing her body further each week. She became certified as a fitness instructor, learning anatomy, nutrition, and coaching techniques. Her past as a patient gave her compassion, her present as an athlete gave her credibility. At the gym, she worked with people who felt broken, women after childbirth, men recovering from injuries, teenagers battling insecurity. She told them, your body is not your enemy. It's your partner. Treat it with respect, and it will surprise you. Her story spread. Local magazines wrote about her. She was invited to speak at community events where she stood on stage, nervous but determined, sharing her truth. Cancer did not end my life, she told audiences. It transformed it. I'm not who I was, but I am stronger than who I was. Applause followed her words, but what mattered most were the quiet conversations afterward. Strangers who hugged her, whispered, thank you. I needed this. Her vegetarian journey grew too. She began blogging recipes, posting photos of colorful plates, writing about how food had helped her heal. Followers grew. People messaged her saying they had changed their diets because of her. She realized she was still teaching, just in a different classroom, one without walls, filled with people from around the world. But she never sugarcoated her story. She spoke of the nights of despair, the scars, the fear that lingered. Healing isn't a straight line, she told her readers. It's a messy road with detours. But every step counts. 2 years after her diagnosis, Laia stood at the starting line of her first marathon. The morning air was crisp, thousands of runners stretching around her. She wore a simple shirt with one word printed across the chest, Survivor. As the race began, she ran with tears streaming down her face. Every mile was a memory. The hospital bed, the chemo, the bruises, the yoga mat, the lentil soup, the journal entries. Strangers cheered her on, clapping and shouting her number. At mile 20, her legs screamed, but she kept going. At mile 26, she saw the finish line, arms raised, lungs burning, heart bursting. Crossing it felt like crossing from death into life once more. That night, medal around her neck, she wrote in her journal, this is not just survival. This is rebirth. Today, Laia is known not as a patient, but as a warrior. She runs marathons, lifts weights, teaches classes. She mentors cancer patients, visits hospitals to speak with those still fighting. She writes articles about nutrition, resilience, and hope. When asked how she beat cancer, she smiles. I didn't just fight it. I rebuilt myself. That's how I won. And when asked what she learned, she answers that life is fragile but also powerful. That fear will walk with you, but it doesn't have to lead you. That every sunrise is a gift and every heartbeat is proof of strength. Cancer was my teacher. Pain was my classroom. But healing is my diploma. And life is the book I will never stop writing.